Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bob Latham here at the APC office. I want to thank everybody for getting on this conference call webinar today to talk about, again, the future of our industry and some very, very important issues and some action that we're going to have to take as a collective group going forward. Like every webinar, there are a series of logistics that need to be reviewed, and I'm going to ask Jason Wagner to review those logistics with you at this time.
Okay. On your screen, you should see some general information regarding the webinar and how things go. The first thing to just point out is that everyone is muted here at the beginning so that we don't get any feedback for the duration of the presentation. However, there is a Q&A box that is located in your control bar for this webinar. You can feel free to type in questions that you might have. We are monitoring that, and we will get to those questions toward the end of the presentation. The other thing is that there is a chat function, but we would like you to use the Q&A so that we make sure we can answer as many questions as we can. But the chat function is also available for you to use. We will have show you at the end of this webinar where you can get some of the materials that we will be presenting here, so you can be assured of that. And also just to let you know that we are recording this so that we can perhaps use it later for those that might not have been able to get on the webinar at this time. So we'll begin here shortly, but just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to log in and know those things.
All right. So here's the agenda for today's conference call. We're going to give a very brief overview of some of the issues that are facing us these days. Look at the current situation, talk about something that we as an industry have been focused on for quite some time, and which is the state police diversion from the motor license fund. We're going to introduce you to a topic, in some cases, introduce you to a topic called Real ID and the impact that that's having on the transportation market and our funding. Talk a little bit about electric vehicle fees, electric vehicle usage, and then we're going to get into what we're going to do, or what we recommend that we do as an industry to try to mitigate this. What our tactics are going to be, what our industry ask is going to be, and then go forward from there. I'm very happy to report that I've had an opportunity to talk to all the leaders of our industry associations, ACEC, ACPA, CAWP, PAPA, and PACA, and I think everybody's kind of agreed that it's go time. And we're going to see what we can get in this current budget situation. Here are the three issues that we're going to be focused on in this conversation today and also throughout the spring. We're going to go into deeper detail on these during the presentations. We're going to talk about the diversion of motor license fund to state police, diversion of motor license fund monies to Real ID, and then the growing amount of electric vehicles that are on our roads. And I know that if you follow the trends in media, trade media, you know that electric vehicles are here to stay. I just saw a recent article in Fleet Management about electric trucks and zero emission trucks. So this is a growing part of our fleet. And we have some advocacy that we're going to talk about here today. Any of you who have attended an industry meeting lately have seen this slide, or a slide that's very similar to this, which describes sort of the ebbs and flows of our market our construction market and our construction lettings, both at the Turnpike and PennDOT over the last several years, starting with the 2008-2009 timeframe as a result of the Obama-era stimulus package, the dip down to 2013, the subsequent increase as a result of Act 89, and you can see now a tapering off, if you will, of monies, at least at in the PennDOT market. And there's been a number of presentations by George McCauley and others from PennDOT on the reasoning for this and the extent of it. But as you can see, we're seeing a precipitous drop in lettings scheduled for this fiscal year, which is a major concern. And we're going to get into some of the reasoning why here in a few minutes. So transportation funding has been in the news lately. Again, this is what we think is a bit of an opportunity here to raise this issue and to move forward with it. Auditor General Eugene DePasquale recently released an audit finding that $4.2 billion in transportation funds have been diverted to the state police since Act 89 was implemented. And again, we can go back further and look at a much higher total than that. So this is one of the things that we want to get into today. And again, the Auditor General had issued a press release and a press conference recently talking about it. And this is something, again, that this industry has been saying for years. We've been talking about it, the diversion of the money from the motor license fund to the general fund, ostensibly for the state police. But the difference now, and the reason we're having this discussion today, is the fact that with this report, with these findings released by the Auditor General, there is now an official state temperature on the issue. Before, it was sort of like, well, this is an industry, complaint, if you will, and we're kind of taking care of this, we're dealing with it. But now, with the Auditor General's report, we have something official to point to. Again, I mentioned the amount of money diverted to the state police since Act 89, and this is one of the statistics that the Auditor General mentioned in his report. Going back further, as I mentioned earlier, we have the entire total at more like $9 billion. So the current plan, many of you will recall, and I think that it was rather positive in 2017, was we finally put a cap on it as those diversions rose to more than $800 million a year. And in fiscal year 2017, there was a cap put on that and a 4% rollback. And we think that this can be accelerated, and that's what we're here to start an advocacy campaign on today. It was recently announced that there is a $800 million budget surplus in the general fund this year. And one of the things we want to talk to the General Assembly about is moving some of that money and using some of that budget surplus to make whole the motor license fund and to accelerate this payback to the motor license fund. So instead of going at a clip of 4% per year over 10 years and getting it back to $500 million, we have a simple ask and a simple proposal. And that would be to increase this to $65 million a year over 12 years and remove it to zero. That's exactly the same amount of money that would be raised by increasing the gas tax by a penny a year. So in essence, by doing this and managing this within a $33 billion state budget, which we think could very easily be done, the General Assembly can move this back to zero and add a lot of money back into the highway fund without raising taxes. So while we're on the topic of money that is intended, user fees money for intended purposes, let's talk a little bit about something called Real ID. Real ID is a Homeland Security requirement that was passed by Congress several years ago. For 3 or 4 years, the Pennsylvania General Assembly resisted complying with this, and finally, under threat of losing all our federal highway funds and other funds, they acquiesced. So because Real ID is in many cases provided to you as a change in your driver's license, this is being administered by PennDOT's Motor Vehicle Administration. However, they are also required to provide other federally accepted identification photo ID cards and a whole slew of infrastructure that is required in order to provide Real ID. Again, a Homeland Security, not a transportation-related operation. However, lo and behold, the proposal is that all of the money to pay for this program in Pennsylvania, approximately $150 million or $25 million a year spread out over 6 years, is going to come out of the motor license fund, something that nobody's talking about. So again, this is money off the top, and by and large, it's going to come out of the capital program. So again, our ask on the Real ID is that with an $800 million budget surplus, this should be paid for out of the general fund and not out of the highway fund or the motor license fund. And again, these are two areas where you will recall during the Act 89 discussions back in 2013, there was some pushback by some members of the General Assembly and others in the public that they didn't trust that the General Assembly would raise their gas taxes and then actually put that money into transportation or into highway improvements. And what we're telling the General Assembly here over the next several weeks and months is that it's time to renew that faith with the taxpayer and actually use the money for its intended purpose. The next issue we're going to discuss are electric vehicle fees, and there is some movement on that. And I'm going to ask Jason Wagner to go over that.
So basically, just a short way of background here is that currently, as you know, our tax system is predicated on the consumption of gasoline and diesel. And back in the Act 89 process, there was an attempt made, but it was unsuccessful to get in the final piece of legislation that passed, which became Act 89, which was implementing some sort of a appropriate user fee structure to properly collect the road user fees from those that are operating purely electric vehicles. So as one of the hanging items, if you will, from Act 89, there is movement on this within the legislature right now, and we would like to kind of go through that with you so that you can use this when talking with legislators. So electric vehicles, and we're talking about the 100% purely electric vehicles, are not paying any fuel taxes at all when they're charging at their homes. There are starting to be some commercial recharging stations out there, and those charging stations under current state law should be collecting what they call an equivalency tax of what those user fees, i.e. a gas tax, would be. However, there is no collection authority or ability to do that when you're charging at a private location or at your home overnight or similar situation. So many states, as you can see on the screen, I know that the print is small here, but this is the point here is that several states, over 20 some states, have already enacted a similar fee that would be assessed at the time you register the vehicle. It's called an electric vehicle registration fee. As you can see here, states from Alabama, California, Michigan, Nebraska, North Carolina, Ohio, etc., Virginia have implemented some sort of an annual fee to collect what essentially would amount to what they would be using throughout the year in gasoline taxes. Just last week, Representative Mike Carroll, who is the minority chair of the House Transportation Committee, sponsored House Bill 1392. It was just introduced last week, and this would implement similar to what other states have done, would implement a $150 a year fee for regular passenger vehicles and a $250 a year fee for commercial vehicles. Again, this is for those 100% purely electric vehicles. So that bill has now been introduced, and we will be asking you all to help us with some push on that here at the end of the presentation.
Is that a bipartisan effort? I noticed most of this. Representative Carroll is a Democrat minority chair. What's our intelligence on the bipartisan nature of that?
While there are no Republicans that have co-sponsored his actual legislation across there that are listed at the top on your screen. However, in talking with both Chairman Hennessy, the Republican Majority Committee Chair, and Representative Carroll, this is planned to be advanced as a bipartisan effort. Representative Hennessy supports this approach, and they both have pledged to work together in a bipartisan fashion to start moving this bill through the House.
Thanks, Jason. All right, so what are some of the key messaging points? We've broken it down into 4 sentences. First of all, the gas tax, or the oil company franchise tax, is a road user fee, and it's intended to be used for roads and not the general fund. Real ID, as we described, is not a transportation function. It's a homeland security function. Third, all users should be paying to maintain the roads they use, and that would be the electric vehicle thing. And then it's important to note one thing that maybe isn't particularly been spelled out in this conversation here today is that our issue today, or our issue going forward, is certainly not about funding for the state police, or whether the state police should be funded, or how much money should be funded, how much the state police should be appropriated. The issue really is that right now, about 3/4 of the entire state police budget is paid for out of the motor license fund. Roughly 12, we hear a lot today about price of gasoline going up because of the seasonal changes. Gas is now hovering around $3 a gallon, and the media rolls out the tried and true, well, Pennsylvania has the highest gas tax in the country, which we do. However, of that 50-some cents per gallon, about 12 cents of it isn't even going to PennDOT or the roads. It's going to the general fund under the guise of propping up the general fund to pay for the state police. We now see Real ID, another $25 million, or half a cent or a third of a cent of the gas tax being proposed over the next several years. So this is the key message. It's not about whether the state police should be funded or whether we should have a robust budget for them. The other thing that this issue is not about is whether municipalities or people who live in municipalities who do not have their own police force should pay in some fashion or another. I know that Governor Wolf has introduced that proposal once again in a different fashion than he had in the past, and occasionally this gets debate. But for our purposes here in the ensuing months and the discussion on the budget and discussion on moving money from the general fund back to the motor license fund, we choose not to climb into that swamp at this point. It's an issue that's going nowhere. Nobody wants to talk about it. For every solution you have, somebody has a counterpoint to it, and the General Assembly just doesn't seem to want to appear to deal with that issue. To which we say, fine, then don't. You have an $800 million surplus. You have a $33 billion a year state budget. Manage $90 million out of it, over the next several years. Let's move the money back to the motor license fund where it belongs. Let's fund Real ID out of the general fund where it belongs, and allow us to increase the transportation and the highway program where it was before. Let's talk about some tactics. But before, I also want to remind you that one of the things we're seeing is other states, some of our other surrounding states are already on the move. It was recently announced that Virginia has enacted a local fuel tax option for districts near I-81, and this is strictly for interstate construction. They've also increased their diesel fuel tax on trucks statewide, and are moving forward there. Our neighboring state, Ohio, increased their gas tax by 10.5 cents per gallon and implemented a $200 a year electric vehicle tax for sole electric vehicles and $100 for hybrids and dual use, raising $865 million. So transportation is in the news. Other states, our competitive states, are taking bold action, and it's time for our General Assembly to do the same. So some of the tactics that we're going to use. Lobbying, of course. All of our associations have not only staff, but in many cases registered lobbyists that can help us with what we call the under the dome activity. PACs. I'm sure all of you, just like us, get daily calls to come to somebody's fundraiser. This should come with a message attached to it. Industry calls. We're going to be asking people to make phone calls, and we're going to be showing you in a few minutes resources we have to help you with that. District office meetings. This was a very effective tactic that we used during Act 89, where we had teams of people going in locally to district offices. And we're going to be organizing those. We're going to be asking for help in getting volunteers to help organize those, but getting people, our members, to go into district offices and where there's no confusion that there is here in Harrisburg, and have an opportunity to talk about things locally and what this means to local people. Other meetings. Local chambers of commerce all have legislative committees and transportation committees. We're going to be calling on our members to go sit in on those meetings and bring this issue before their attention, and in many cases, hopefully, get their help in lobbying legislators on this issue. Op-eds, self-explanatory. We'll show you how to do that. Phone calls, talk shows, social media, and a new phone app called Phone-to-Action. So again, we just talked a little bit about how you can be an advocate for change. And as I mentioned, the one thing we're really going to need is help in organizing some of these meetings in the district. We're going to have to do this very rapidly over the next 2 weeks, put together a structure there with some volunteers. It shouldn't be too hard. Again, industry support, some of the things we talked about here. Local chamber committees, district office meetings, op-eds or letters to the editor, and reporting back. So we're going to have all of the associations engaged. We'll set up a communications network through the association staffs. You'll be able to work with APC or one of the other association offices We want to make this an all industry effort. Finally, something called Phone to Action, which is very easy for you and also for your employees to use. And I'm going to let Jason talk a little bit about Phone to Action.
So some of you that are on this webinar have already signed up, and we thank you very much for doing this. This is something we launched during the APC Fall Seminar back in November. What is on the screen is a way that you can help us right now by signing up and taking action both at the same time. Following this webinar, those that are on the already signed up is for our advocacy team, as we called it, will get an alert that they can send this note here to their legislator. But if you also go to our website, you will see all this information, and we'll get to that here in a second. But basically what this is a tool that it streamlines our efforts that allow you to send a very quick, you can do this with your smartphone or you can do it from your computer desktop, where we will give you a sample email down there, which is what is in that box below, and you can modify that if you would like, or tailor it to how you, if you want to add or subtract things in there, but it is just a guide, or you can send it just as it is. You can do this, and it'll automatically distribute this to both your representative and senator as soon as you click the send email button. I just want to encourage you, if you use this, please use your home address. It's not that we want to collect that information from you, but that is how the system identifies who your actual representative and senators are. It's not necessarily your work address. So by putting in your email address or your mailing address and zip code in the boxes there on the screen, that is how it identifies who your representative and senator would be to get the appropriate person, since you are a voter and a constituent. So
where can you find Phone to Action?
So Phone to Action is integrated immediately within our website. There is a link there for you on the APC website. However, if you go onto the front page of our website, you will see a nice scrolling banner there that'll jump you directly to this. And you can fill it out right there. So Phone to Action is the back end of this. So you can, in the box that is in the upper right hand of that page, you can fill out what I just went through and get the emails out and to your elected officials. However, if you, on the screen that you see there, we have other things that we wanted to provide to you to assist you in helping us with these advocacy efforts. If you look there, we have some links here that'll help you if you are more comfortable with perhaps calling your legislator. We've provided a link there about how you can use some talking points when calling an elected official. If you would like to talk to them about the motor license fund diversion issues or the electric vehicle registration, we've put some sample talking points there to help you do that. We have a document that will help you craft a letter to the editor. If you would like to send something to your local newspaper, that helps very well, because elected officials do like to read what people are saying in their local news coverage. We've provided you some document and some points to help you craft that. We've also put some links that you can help us use social media. One of the things that if you do this Phone to Action, it'll ask you if you want to share this on your social media page or on the elected officials' social media page. We would encourage you to do that, because more and more of these new elected officials are using Twitter and other social media devices to communicate with constituents and to hear from you. So if you post this stuff on Twitter, for example, they're seeing it, because a lot of these newer and younger representatives are using that tool very much to interact with their constituents. And we've also given you some background information that we've talked about today. And if you want to see the full Auditor General report that Bob had mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we've provided those links for you, as well as copy of Representative Carroll's legislation. I will just take this time to remind you, if there is the Q&A box. If you would like to type in a question of something that might not have been clear or that you would like answered, feel free to type that in at this point in time. And we will also be communicating these links to you as part of being on this webinar. We will be emailing you within the next hour with a direct link to where you can get all of this stuff that's on your screen.
All right, well, again, we want to see if there's any questions. We're not having any at this point. I've had a couple of questions posed as we've been setting up this webinar. First of all, somebody asked me, you know, we only have 6 weeks. Can we get this done? And the answer is very simply, I don't know. But one thing I do know is that if we don't get active, if we don't get in the game, and if we don't push very hard, we will have the opportunity to sit here for 6 weeks and watch somebody else capture the $800 million budget surplus while we continue to send highway money and our market money to the general fund. We have several asks here. Obviously, the one has to do with rolling the money back to the state police, from the state police budget to the motor license fund. The other is that a Homeland Security issue be funded by the general fund and not by the motor license fund. And third is, of course, that the electric vehicle owners start to pay. The idea on electric vehicles is, of course, it's not a heck of a lot of money at this point. You'll notice we didn't really even give you a revenue estimate. I think it's something like $2 million or less at this point, which is a rounding error. However, the key on that one is the future. The key is with the growth and with the movement on low emission vehicles or zero emission vehicles, the manufacturers are investing in these vehicles, and we want to have this thing in place for when they start to proliferate. Okay.
Just wanted to see here if there's any questions that anyone has or comments or there is there's a question that just came in that says what would be the best way to contact a legislator? And again, I would answer that myself as any way possible, any and all ways. The best way to contact a legislator, quite frankly, is in their districts back home. That is one of the reasons why we use or are planning to use this phone to action device. This sends them an email or a letter, and it does use email, but there is a function where if you would like to mail your letter, it'll give you their district office information. We would encourage you to hit them back home. Please identify yourself as a constituent, as a voter for them. That's what's important. Not only are you a constituent, but you're a voter, and don't be afraid to challenge them on these issues. That's what they're there for, and that's what you should do as well.
We also got a question about what's the best way to get in touch with your local news media, or how do you send a letter to the editor? Usually in the op-ed section of your paper, there will be email addresses and other instructions on how to send that in. If you're willing to do an op-ed piece, which is usually entitled something like "As I See It" or something like that, you could contact us here, and we have our communications director, Kim Maiolo, and our communications consultant, Rick Kelly, from Triad Strategies, can assist you in both drafting and placing op-ed pieces.
Again, someone else had asked a question about putting the email in your own words. Feel free to do that. You can take that email and customize it. We just know that some people may or may not have the time. Feel free to use what has been provided in its entirety if you'd like. but you can customize those email notes to your legislator.
Somebody also asked, what is the total amount of the diversion that is being taken this year? Jason, do you know the answer to that? I do. I'm just checking to see if he does.
The amount of money that has been diverted this year would be about 737 million is what is proposed from this year's budget to the state police portion of it. That would not account the Real ID. That is about another 25 million that they're proposing in the budget to pay for Real ID this year. So those are just two.
So if we're successful, we're in the neighborhood of $50 million going back to the motor license fund, which, you know, in the case of if it's bondable, could be very significant in just this year. All right, we've got a question of how are we reaching out to other members of the industry. I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at is we're going to be asking our membership and those on the call to perhaps forward this to people who say they're not aware of these efforts going forward, or maybe send us links or lists of those companies that may or may not be members of either APC or other industry associations, so we can make sure that they're on board and get them involved with this.
Yeah.
All right, here's a good question here. What are other causes fighting for this money now? Where does the political willpower lie with the current administration? Those are two questions, both very good questions. What are the other causes fighting for this money? Everything and everybody. So if you let's start with education. The education community has been marching to the Capitol and asking for $100 million, additional $100 million in basic education funding. They've also asked for $50 million in special education funding increase. And then finally, they've asked for money for reimbursement for construction, for school construction, something called PlanCon, which would be in the order of another couple $100 million that's been stalled. So that's just one interest group, the education interest that's looking for additional money. I also understand that the electric utilities, combined with the manufacturers of electric vehicles, are coming to Harrisburg and asking for subsidies to build out charging station infrastructure, and asking for that to be paid for. Those are just a couple of examples of who is fighting for the money. Where does the willpower lie with the current administration? I would say right now, the support is there from the Transportation Department. The governor's office is somewhat unclear. I think the governor is still focused on his Restore Pennsylvania initiative, which would be funded by a severance tax. We'll see in the ensuing weeks whether that gets any momentum or not. So far, all of our conversations with particularly House Republicans it's dead in the water, so don't even talk about it. I understand the Republicans have issued a series of bills sort of as an answer to that, having to do more with power generation in rural areas. Any other questions?
Not at this point in time.
These are all very good questions and things that obviously we're going to be fleshing out as we go along. The more you can help us reach out to other industry supporters and other companies so that they make sure that they know what we're doing here and they get themselves involved with it. We're not, as you can see, this is not a very costly project that we're asking you to do. It's only costly in terms of time and effort. The materials are there, the support materials are there for you. We're going to have to be organizing ourselves, getting out, making phone calls, setting up appointments, and going into seeing people and saying, you know, it's time to really put a dent in this siphoning off of money, and let's fund the highway program. Let's look at some of the other states and things that they're doing, whom we're competing with, and make sure we don't fall behind. The final thing is we're going to be asking for feedback. So as we have those contacts, we're definitely going to need to hear back from you in the form of either feedback directly to us here at APC or to your other association offices as well. Okay. And with that, I think that we're done with Q&A. As Jason mentioned, there'll be a lot of follow-up here, and we'll be marshaling forces and moving forward. I want to thank all the folks that got on the line here today for taking the time, and also thank you in advance for all your efforts.
Thank you very much.